maids, au pairs, gardeners, babysitters, and other domestic workers to the wealthy. What's the weirdest thing you've seen rich people do behind closed doors? I can't think of anything particularly scandalous, but there seemed to be a really disproportionate number of uncomfortably close relationships between meek, grown sons who still lived at home and their domineering mothers. I was a nanny for a really wealthy family. Their public face was polished and put together. My second day on the job, I noticed that there were really intricate alarms and lock systems on each of the kids' bedroom doors. It turns out the dad was a registered sex offender. The alarm systems would turn on and lock the kids' doors at 9:30 p.m. The mom had to use a special code to open them if the kids needed her during the night. They turned out to be a really fricked up family, so I was only a nanny for a year. What the frick? Why would you stay with someone you need to keep locked away from your children? Imagine having to explain that to the kids when they get older, why they had to grow up locked up. When you have the opportunity to be in people's homes, behind the scenes or before they have been cleaned, you learn things about them. If you have a housekeeper, he or she will see all your stuff. They will pretend they don't, or that seeing it or dealing with it is totally usual. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes people are fricked up and you get to see what their friends and family don't see. People had a spa bath that had actual physical and visible mushrooms growing from the grouting, about 15 cms tall. Fascinating. Had worked around drug paraphernalia, guns, sex toys, unflushed toilets and exotic pets that were just hanging out. I've cleaned up around leopard skins, coral, taxidermy eagles, shark's jaws, tortoise and turtle shells and a stuffed bear, which is totally freaking weird as I live in NZ. A couple who had taken out the innards from their many smoke alarms and installed hidden cameras in them throughout the house. The one thing that irks me to this day is being yelled at by crazy pee-high guy in his undies at his cacti. They sat in full sun. Their house is beachfront. He was the cheap cacti in plastic pots were not thriving and was convinced it was because I wasn't watering them enough. Size. Their pot dirt was always sodden. Heck, can't win 'em all. The cactus needed better draining soil and to dry out between waterings. Source: I'm cheap cacti owner, but mine are flourishing. Frick you rich guy. Totally forget how they got their start in life. I used to work for a guy who ran his businesses into the ground and declared bankruptcy, more than once I believe. He then married rich and his wife paid for him to go to school for a decent certification. He now owns a business that's slowly failing because of how he runs it, but he and his wife still have plenty of family money, and they're well respected in the community. He complains non-stop about lazy millennials who are so entitled and think they deserve free stuff from the government. It bugged me so much to see how he was so dependent on grace and luck that just doesn't exist anymore. But he thought he was so much better than anyone who wanted a leg up. Technically behind the garage door, neighbor won the lottery. Nothing huge, but nice. He took the lump sum and upgraded his little ranch to have a big butt garage and in-ground pool and cabana. Never was anyone there prior, but after, he had so many friends. One of the first things he bought was his dream car, a red Lamborghini. One day in the summer, he was having a party, and his friends wanted him to show it off, so he started it up, and was revving it in the garage when it caught fire, burned the house to the ground, taking half the money he had in cash and duffel bags with it. Turns out, he didn't have insurance, ended up using the rest of the winnings to rebuild his old house, but lost everything. Somehow he managed to push the Lambo out of the garage, and to this day, there's a half-burned Lamborghini under a tarp in his backyard, 20 years later. This is really sad. How the heck do you not get insurance after winning the lottery? The family that regularly bought complicated Lego sets for their 5-year-old, and then assembled them for him because they were too complicated for a 5-year-old, while he looked on and complained they weren't doing it fast enough, still receive periodic installments of my pity and contempt. Like, dude, he's not learning anything except that mommy and daddy were put on the planet to please him, and he's not actually learning anything from the toys. They also bought the kid new toys once a week or so. I can't with some parents. Maybe they actually really liked Lego and just pretended to be doing it for the kid. My sister used to be a nanny for a very famous former F1 driver. I'm pretty sure the kids' outdoor playset, jungle gym, castle-like playhouse etc. cost more than my sister's apartment. On the plus side, him and his wife are apparently the most down-to-earth, sweet people. I was an au pair for a crazy wealthy family in DC. They were so oddly frugal with some things, and with other things it's like they didn't have any logic. The strangest was probably hiring a pet sitter while they went on holidays. While I was living there with no holiday plans, they paid me for the 2 weeks they were on holiday and also paid the pet sitter $50 a day for 5 minutes of work. Plus they left lube all over the house in tiny sample bottles, like in the kitchen, in the mud room. My mom first came to Germany as an au pair for a family of 5. The mother was a doctor and the dad was an engineer, and they had 3 teenage boys. They were not insanely rich, but my mom grew up in a village in rural Thailand, so it was definitely a different dimension for her. She got up every day at 5 to make breakfast for the whole family when one morning, the father comes down the stairs butt naked, followed by the mom, fully nude as well, and the kids who were also wearing nothing. They apparently spend a couple of days like this in the summer. Imagine how shocked my mom must have been being a little 21-year-old Asian girl in a foreign country, having to serve a fully naked family. I lived with a girl from an insanely wealthy family in college. What amazed me the most was how completely clueless she was when it came to cleaning. I mean, she grew up with maids her entire life and college was the first time she didn't have someone cleaning up after her, so I figured she might be untidy, but I wasn't prepared. I asked her to clean the kitchen once and she came home with a box of powdered bleach from the dollar store and sprinkled it around the counters, then rubbed it around with a wet paper towel. I worked for an insanely wealthy woman in CT, and she was just as crazy as she was rich. She was elderly when I worked for her as a personal assistant. My job was mostly researching the location of the Shroud of Christ. Yes, the Shroud of Christ. She was a devout Catholic and she had a slew of creepy, religious freaks working for her too. She'd call me on speakerphone first thing every morning from her room and I'd have to go through every email, including spam, that she got. Took me a few weeks to realize why she was always grunting during our interaction. It was her morning dump routine. She had some sort of skin condition that covered her entire body with open sores that constantly oozed and flaked. It was so bad that her maid changed her sheets 3 times a day, as that's where she conducted most of her business. Besides the strange religious employees, 3 secretaries and maid, her mentally handicapped daughter lived with her mother still, and somehow her boyfriend moved in and her mother was tricked into signing the rights to her daughter's boyfriend, so he was there too. And he was also mentally handicapped. One of her workers told me that her daughter was born with one leg shorter than the other, so her mom had her shorter leg amputated and it's what drove her daughter to insanity. Crazy times. Throughout high school I worked for a guy that was worth over $2 billion according to the internet. Every summer, the very timid rich man would leave every day as I arrived, and I would always be terrified to talk to him. Until the first time he initiated a conversation with me and I soon realized he was far more nervous than me, which I found odd. After that, he stopped leaving for work until an hour or 2 after I arrived. Thought nothing of it, until one day I was close enough to the house to see him and his wife, naked, and while she was fondling his junk they were both just looking out the window at me, and out of denial, I guess, I stopped paying attention to the windows as it likely happened for the following 2 years I was there. But at 14-18, it's hard to turn down $1,000 a week, cash, and to be honest, I didn't even mind if they did it every day. Apparently it was mutually beneficial to everyone involved. I'm a male and I used to babysit for people on my street when I was a teenager of about 14 or so. Male babysitters, I found out, were a hot commodity for parents of male kids. I would play sports and video games with them. Not that female babysitters can't, but they tended not to. One family of 2 boys was rather well off. They had a big house and 2 really nice cars. The parents bought these kids literally every toy. The basement rec room was like a Toys R Us store, with half the stuff opened and half still in boxes. On the first day I discovered the Lego. Tons of it and almost all unopened. I asked the boys why they hadn't played with the Lego, and they kinda said, "We kinda just haven't gotten around to it yet." Judging by all the toys around, I can believe that. Well, we're going to play the frick out of this Lego today, I said, without actually saying frick. We cleared off some space on the coffee table and dumped out every box. We threw the instructions aside and built the biggest space station that 40 odd Lego sets can build. I even came back a couple days when I wasn't working just to build and play Lego with the boys. They had a ton of fun and became Lego maniacs like me. TLDR. Parents bought the boys so many toys, they didn't even open the boxes of Lego. Well, I've been in a couple really rich people's houses who have had fires. One is a semi-famous boxer, 2 world championship belts, which he had sitting on his kitchen table. The weird part was, he had pictures of himself hanging all over the house. Not with his kids or his wife in the pictures, mind you, just of him. It was weird. And another couple full on screamed at their kid because he allowed smoke to get into his trombone case. Not sure how he was supposed to prevent that, but whatever. They also lost their minds because the insurance company wouldn't pay to get them brand new handmade cabinets imported from Italy. One family lived in the middle of nowhere. Huge house. Had a hot tub room. Every bedroom had a walk-in closet and a bathroom suite. Crazy stuff like that. But this guy absolutely loved his 4-wheeler. He told me he paid to add an attached garage specifically for his 4-wheeler, and the 4-wheeler was the only thing allowed in the garage. When in my late teens I did babysitting work for my uncle and aunt's children. Bit of context. Both of our families came from basically nothing. Both my mum, dad and uncle worked their ass off in their 20s 30s to get to where they are. Uncle ended up with the more lucrative business. My parents also want to ensure that me and my sisters didn't grow up to be entitled crap heads, so if we wanted something that didn't directly relate to our education or well-being, we were paying for it. We were all employed by the family business by the time we were 13. What I learned doing babysitting for my young cousins that they were experience the complete opposite. They got whatever they wanted whenever. It was so surreal to interact with these kids who casual talk about and showed me toys, phones, watches and various other items that my uncle and aunt got them on basically a whim. Who randomly spends thousands of dollars on ultimately useless things for their kids regularly like this. As a result, 2/3 cousins grew up to be self-entitled buttholes. I read about this British billionaire who set up a trust fund for his kids. The way it worked was that it would pay them $3 for every dollar they made on their own. They didn't work, then they didn't get anything. I always thought that was brilliant. It ensures that no matter what job they take, they can live comfortably while also ensuring that they have to work to have a living. I worked as a live-in au pair for 2 doctors and got less than minimum wage and board. The child was only 8 months old and they both wanted to work full-time. We agreed I'd work 30-40 hours a week, but I was pressured to work 60 instead. The parents criticized everything I did, even little things like what time of day I did chores, when they weren't even home. In public, they looked like a perfect couple. Behind closed doors they barely talked. There were no conversations except about their work, and the father barely spent any time with the child. He would go so far as to eat meals in his study. Au pairs are supposed to become part of the family, but there really wasn't one to become part of. The end of my employment was after I got a pelvic infection and neither of them believed me even after diagnosis and antibiotics. They expected me to work the day after I was out of hospital. It was a real loss, because I loved looking after their child. I was a nanny for a pretty affluent family for a summer, and on the whole they were really nice and great parents. 2 things stood out to me. On one occasion, they had family friends visiting with their 3 children, so I worked a full day taking care of the 5 kids while the 4 adults just hung out in the house, ostensibly working from home but really just drinking wine and hanging out. I understand occasionally having the nanny come while you're there so you can work well from home, but nannying 5 children whose parents were 10 feet away was a little absurd. The second thing is that they reused Ziploc bags. I honest to God probably spent at least 45 minutes a day washing, drying, and organizing their Ziploc bags. My husband used to work for a landscaping company. There was one lady he would always come home with crazy stories, like they paid a pilot year-round just to be on standby in case they wanted to fly somewhere. Also, they apparently paid Google a fee every year to keep their property off of Google Maps. Also, if this is the same woman and I'm remembering correctly, she had 2 solid platinum reindeer for Christmas decorations. The family I worked for did the Google thing as well. Also bought the property across the street because the family there had a barking dog and it fricked up their rural immersion. Mobile dog groomer. I went to an older rock star's house to groom his dog. He was never home but his wife was always there. Always. She wanted me to drive my mobile grooming van with tub, shampoos, dryers, AC, out to her house 30 miles away, get out of the van, go into her house. I had to wear those glove booties that go on your feet like you see in hospitals. Use their shampoo, which was just human shampoo from Whole Foods. Use their hair dryer, but only on low and never on hot. Use her brushes and combs, which were human ones and didn't work on the dog, and wash the dog in her sink, while she would randomly go through the house with her housekeeper cleaning a house that was already clean and reorganizing the same 10 bookshelves. She would randomly sneak behind me and watch me groom her dog, which was just standing there with a hairdryer for an hour trying to dry the dog. I wasn't allowed to touch the dog's toys. If he brought me one I was to ignore it. The dog was being overwashed and they were using a shampoo that was making it worse. They blamed allergies and replaces their backyard grass with fake grass. Then when I was finished I would wipe everything down and wait at the door. She would write me a check for $40, no tip, and then try and talk to me about whatever for an hour. The best day ever with her was she was going to the airport and let me and said just ask the maid for permission to go when you're done, and then she left for the airport. The maid wandered in 10 minutes later and was like, that bee is gone for a month. I'm going home. Lock the door after yourself. Bye. So I took the dog to my van, actually got it groomed in about 20 minutes, returned it and then wandered around their house. Saw the original art for some of the dude's albums. Took a pee in his toilet and then looked through his medicine cabinet. Turns out I think he had a stroke judging by his meds, which would explain a lot. Otherwise it was kinda empty and sad. Few family photos. Nothing exciting. I tried to fire her as a client but the owners were so starstruck that they got to groom dog, even though it was me. When I quit, the owners and the rock star's wife had a big blow up. She wrote them a check in advance for his next 2 months of grooms and told them not to cash it till X date. But she cancelled it before they could cash it. She was obviously mentally ill and needed help, but years of money and fame and no one telling her no have ruined any chances of that. I mostly felt bad for that dog. They overwashed it and that's what is casting 90% of the problems. Forgive my spelling. I am dumb. Hints, it's a dude. He's old. He was on a reality TV show, not British. Worked for a billionaire family. The missus could no longer have children biologically and had used donor eggs for her youngest. She cornered me one day and said, I've always wanted Eurasian children. I think they're the most beautiful people. She goes on and on about wanting them and thinking about finding an egg donor. I'm Asian American. She has a staff of 20+ people at her house. Why did she feel the need to corner me to tell me this? It was one of the most uncomfortable 15 minutes of my life. In her spare time, which was all the time, she studied many subjects. One of them was gemology. One day, while on a trip to a poor country rich in gems and minerals, she decided she'd to go shopping for gems. The pricing for these gems would have been a fraction of retail. The mister gave her a budget of $50k. Immediately, she tells him that she did not go to gemology school for just $50k. Immediately, he upped her budget to $120k, minus $8,000 spent on one order for solid white playtime t-shirts for her toddlers. That being said, they compensated their staff quite well. I received a decent salary, medical, vision, dental insurance, a 401k, and a clothing allowance in case I needed anything for work. I make travel plans for the wealthy. One guy always pays for an extra night before he arrives at any hotel. He doesn't want a room that someone else has slept in the night before, but the day after. That's apparently okay. I have 2 jobs like this, and 2 stories. Job A: I'm a nanny. Family isn't overly rich or anything, really down to earth, but the dad keeps complaining on the down low to me whenever he has to see his in-laws. It's actually pretty funny. Job B: I guess I'm a PA for this woman who runs her own business. She just keeps buying things. Like she straight up bought me a new MacBook, then a Surface to use as the work computer. Thinks $3,000 for website redesign is cheap and paid it up front. Maybe I'm just poor though, who knows. 3k for a website redesign is cheap if it's done by pros. Our web designers used to charge 1k just for the design and then 125 per hour of programming. Anything that's not a standard template will cost at least that much. I used to work security for a high-rise building in uptown Dallas. There was a VIP parking garage underneath the building. Entry required a special toll tag be in the window of your car. The wife of a couple that owns a large part of Home Depot had it mounted on the bumper of her Bentley and then had the entire bumper repainted to hide the tag. Long story short, the tag was now at the wrong angle to transmit to the reader. Thousands wasted when she could have just asked first. Of course, she couldn't ask personally. She always had her PA do it. I think he was also her lawyer. A very famous actress who lives in town has a dozen eggs hard boiled every day and she snacks on them during the day. Only eats 2, toss the other 10 and make 12 more the next day. I assume her farts are of the devil. I was an au pair for a British-Spanish couple in London. They raised their daughter trilingual and even sent her to a German school. But because the school finished 2-3 hours before British schools, the mum thought it was okay to make little Helena study at home. So each day, I would have to take a sheet of paper and document the times and how well Helena did at the following tasks: German reading, German writing, English reading, English writing, guitar, exercise, lunch, what she ate, how she behaved, playtime. Once I was finished with her, it was bedtime and mum would take her to her room and make her read in Spanish. Her weekends were filled with acting school, ballet and so on. Her parents planned to send her off to a private school in Germany within 1-2 years and the mum told me she plans to send Helena to Oxford University. Helena was never allowed around a friend's house but she was allowed to have a friend over on a Friday for a few hours. Aside from this playtime, her whole life revolved around getting good grades. We lived in Putney, which is just a bus ride away from all the famous museums. Yet, Helena was not allowed on public transport. The worst part was, the parents would literally not acknowledge her until she had finished all her tasks. Several times, the mum worked from home and would, I am not exaggerating, push Helena away if Helena wanted a hug. Why? Well, because we were in the middle of one of her many tasks. One day mum wanted me to teach Helena how to write essays. Helena was freaking 7 years old. She had difficulty integrating into the school because she was quite literally the only non-German pupil as far as I knew. She had no sense of identity and was just a little psycho who was so attached to anybody who gave her attention, me, that I would have to tell her off and get her parents involved because she wouldn't let me go to the toilet. Like a puppy, she would wait outside the door. Once we had managed to get her to let go off my leg, it was an absolute freak show. I lasted 4 months before I gave up. Helena had a big mental breakdown when she saw her mum at home and mum didn't acknowledge her. So I went up to her bedroom office and told her I quit. Then I texted my previous au pair mum and she came to pick me up within 3 hours. This previous au pair mum is still my close friend. 10 years on. Helena should be 18 now and I really wonder how she has turned out. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.